Alright, fuckers, welcome back to my tutorial series. This is the third episode, I think. Yeah, it's the third one. I'm going to be going over all the stuff in the VAB. I'm not going to worry about the space plane hangar right now, because planes are for later. Like I said, you're not ready to make a plane, don't worry about it. I'm going to show you what all the parts do. I'm going to show you all about the action groups, all about how to order your staging, all about... Fuck off, fan. All about these here, these editing tools, and these buttons down here. I'm going to show you all about that stuff, and all the different editing tools you have at your disposal. I'm going to show you about the sub-assemblies. We'll talk about all that, but I'm just going to start in here with all the different command pods. We pretty much already covered all these, but I kind of want to give you an idea now, right? So let's take a look at the unmanned ones first. So let's have a look at this Probodobodyne. The Probodobodyne guidance units. Then you have your remote guidance units. These are for like larger ships. They take a lot more power to run. So let's just place one of these down for now. Let's get this hex here. So pretty much there's no real difference between any of these unmanned probes. They're all pretty much, they all serve the same purpose, and they can all do the same thing. They hold a small amount of electric charge, and they require constant electric charge to run. One big difference between these and sorry, I just ate. Between these and regular command pods, aside from requiring a constant electric charge to continue operating, is that they don't have any built-in reaction wheels. So that means you're gonna have to actually add your own reaction wheels on. It says stuff about reaction wheels here, but believe me, these tiny little probe cores have nothing to speak of for reaction wheel. No guidance systems whatsoever. So if you're using one of these, I recommend just sticking an advanced inline stabilizer on it. I'll talk about all this stuff later. Don't worry about it right now. I'm just going to demonstrate kind of how unmanned probes work right now. So let's just stick a fuel tank and a engine on here. We'll go with the Terrier, smallest one, and let's just launch this and you'll see. Engines, when they are fired, they generate an electric charge as well, so we don't have to worry about adding any of the other stuff later, but I'll show you how to generate power. Let me just go over this really quickly first. So here we are. Of course we're not going anywhere because this engine doesn't do jack for thrust. So we'll just kind of glide off into nothing and blow up, but you get the idea. Basically, the unmanned units allow you to operate a vehicle without having to worry about sacrificing a crew if you want to test something or whatever. But you don't want to, or you want to set up satellites in orbit. They're perfect for satellites. They're perfect for, space stations that you don't want a manned space station. They're perfect for that. They're perfect for, if you want to send say base pieces to another planet without having to send the Kerbals with them first. I mean, Kerbals in this game are pretty tough individuals. They don't need food, they don't need water, they're immune to radiation, they don't need any oxygen, they don't need anything, so it's really easy to send them places that you need to go. So, but in case maybe you're not, you're just starting out in this game, maybe you don't want to kill any of your Kerbals right away, unmanned cores are for you. Alright, let's talk about everything else now. That's pretty much everything in the command pod section. Pretty much the command pods are just used as the base for ships and where you store your crew. There's also some other modules that can hold people as well. They're not crew modules, though I'll talk about those later. But yeah, you just can hover over stuff. Here's the external seat. See, place it on the outside, and you load Kerbals into it manually. I'll demonstrate that some other time. Let's talk about the other category, because there's categories, right? You got your pods. So let's move on to the next one, the fuel tanks. And you know, like we built something simple using fuel tanks earlier, but I'm gonna go in more in depth about like the different types. Here you have these adapter fuel tanks, and I guess these are more for like planes, or if you have a smaller part, like for example, say this FLT 400 fuel tank here, right? And you want to attach it to a larger fuel tank, you would stick one of these adapters in between, and you get a bit of extra fuel and oxidizer. Let me show you that now. Let me find it too. There's 3 different sizes of tank. I'm actually gonna show that in a sec, but let me just show you how the adapters work first. Come on, where is it? Okay, so here's a big jumbo 64 tank, right? This is a 2.5 meter tank, right? And see, they fit nicely together. It's clean attachment, right? So yeah, that's what adapters are for. They're made, and you can use them in place of, for example, like instead of just they make it more aerodynamic too. The air flows around them instead of just kind of hitting it, like say if you had it like this. So yeah, that's another thing adapters do. Now I'll talk about the different sizes of fuel tanks and the different types of fuel tanks. So the first kind of fuel tank, and the most prominent kind of fuel tank you'll be using for all your space missions, is of course the rocket fuel tank. And I'll show you they come in 3 different sizes. Here's the 1.5 meter, or no, is it 1.5 meter? Or no, this is a 1.25 meter tank. It's the smallest kind of tank you can get. There's a couple smaller, smaller sizes, as you can see, but I'm talking about like diameter wise. There's a couple of smaller sizes you can get, but generally these are like the 1.25 meter tanks. You know, here I'll line them all up on the bottom of this one. They just come in different heights. Here's an external fuel duct. I'll talk about that now. What that allows you to do is, say for example, you have your tanks attached on the outside like this, and you want fuel from the you have engines attached to them. So let me just get some simple engines to show you that. Let's just get, you know, Terriers. Alright, say, you know, they'll only burn fuel from these tanks, but if you want to burn fuel from the center tanks with those engines, you take your fuel duct, right, and you slap it onto the fuel tank that you want to push fuel from, right? So we slap it onto this tank, and we'd enable 2x symmetry mode, and then we would attach it also to this tank, because it's like a cord. You attach it both ways. See, and then there's some arrows on them that indicate which way the fuel flow is. So as you can see, the fuel is flowing from this tank, central tank, to this tank. So that means that now the engines on the outside can burn fuel from the inner tanks. Pretty simple. Alright, so now that we've talked about the smallest tanks, here's the second size of tanks. There's a bunch of different kinds of these, but they all generally are the same size, 2.5 meters. Here's the smallest who's the shortest 2.5 meter tank. Here's the next one up, and the next one up. And the largest one is this orange Jumbo 64 tank. I'll just attach it on the outside so you can see. You know, those are pretty simple. There's the 1.5 and the 1.25 and 2.5 meter tanks. You know, there's a bunch of different kinds of them. Like, there's all these different kind of style of them, like plain fuselages. For example, these ones up here, these Mark IIs here, these are all 2.5 meter tanks. They're just designed to be streamlined so they can be used for aircraft. You won't generally be using these for rockets, but you can if you want to. You just have to look at which ones are which, because tanks come with different fuel types in them as well, which I'll explain in a bit. So let's get rid of all this shit, and I'll show you the largest size of tank, the 3.75 meter tanks. These were only recently added. Back in the day we only really had 1.25 and 2.5 meter tanks, but they added these so we had a bit more power. Here's a 3.75 meter tank, biggest tank kind of tank available. Here is a smaller version of it, a shorter version. Here's the tallest version. Pretty simple, you know, and you'd generally use these for massive first stages. I use them a lot. And then there's also these Mark III fuselages, which are just basically the same thing, but designed to be more streamlined for really big aircraft. So yeah, that's it for the 3.75 meter tanks. Now I'll show you the different types of fuel. So we have our liquid fuel and oxidizer pair, which are used for, you know, just basic rocket engines, right? And then you have just liquid fuel, because when you're using jet engines, you don't need oxidizer because the air is the oxidizer. So you can have just liquid fuel tanks, right? And they carry twice as much liquid fuel. They carry twice as much liquid fuel rather than carrying like liquid fuel and oxidizer. They instead carry more liquid fuel. So let me show you one of those right now. Here's a Mark I liquid fuel fuselage, and this is of course a 1.5 meter one. Here's a liquid fuel fuselage, Mark II version, 2.5 meter liquid fuel fuselage designed for an aircraft. And then they have the Mark III, the 3.75 meter liquid fuel fuselage. Now these are generally used for jet engines. However, you can also use it for a special type engine called the nuclear engine, which also works in space, right? And it's just a super efficient engine, but it has super low thrust. And that's pretty much all. And it only takes liquid fuel. You don't need oxidizer for it, so there's that. So there's the liquid fuel fuselage. Now I'm going to talk about the RCS. Of course, it comes in, you know, the same kind of sizes. You have your, except I think there's no 3.75 meter RCS tank. There's a 1.25 meter right here, and then there's an even smaller one, right? Even smaller than 1.25, right? And then this is the biggest RCS tank available, the 2.5 meter. There is also a set of radial RCS tanks here, right? There's a couple also radial fuel tanks you can attach, right? And radial RCS just means you can like attach it on the sides of stuff. And the neat thing about RCS is you can place your RCS anywhere on your ship and it'll still burn from the fuel. You don't need fuel pumps or anything to run to the RCS. It just kind of pumps it automatically, so you don't need to worry about piping or anything. So you can place a bunch of these on the side and have as much RCS as one of these big tanks without having to stack it. Because like I said, these aren't radially attachable, so you have to stack them in the actual, like, you have to stack them vertically with the rest of the parts. So that's RCS. And RCS thrusters I'll talk about in a bit, so don't worry about that if you're confused right now. Just know that RCS is a type of fuel you need for those RCS thrusters, and they won't work without it. Next, I'm going to talk about the xenon fuel. Here's two types of xenon containers. Really small one and a really large and a 1.25 meter one. And then you've got your radial xenon containers as well. And basically they operate a really low power small engine that I'm going to talk about later when I get to the engines category. And then the last and final type of fuel tank we have here is these holding tanks. They hold ore, right? And ore, when you mine it from the surface of planets, can be processed into fuel. I'll talk about that when I get to the utilities section, because there's a drill in there that you use to kind of collect everything, and then you can put it in these holding tanks and you can process it into fuel. But it's a multi-step process, so I'll talk about it as we get to it. For now, I'm going to end the video here because that took a long time, and I think I'm getting close to my 15-minute limit, so I'll see you in the next one.